Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Communication. For the Hansard record, could you please each give your name and the capacity in which you appear today?
Good afternoon, Senator. Richard Wood. I'm First Assistant Secretary, International Aviation Technology and Services for the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development. And I am accompanied by a number of other senior executives from the department today. I'll myself starting with my colleague Janet Quigley.
Good afternoon, Senator. This is Janet Quigley. I'm First Assistant Secretary of the Domestic Aviation and Reform Division.
Jason Demosky, Assistant Secretary of Domestic Aviation and Reform.
Nā Opoku, Assistant Secretary, Safety and Future Technology Branch.
Louise Rawlings, Head of ITRA.
I don't know if you can see me, sorry. Lucinda McTaggart, I'm the Director of the VicTAS Airports and Economic Regulation team.
Great, thank you. Well, it sounds like we've got all the right people at the table. Do you wish to make an opening statement?
No, Senator, we thought given the time and the breadth of issues that you may wish to cover, we wouldn't provide an opening statement unless you wanted us to outline our responsibilities.
No, I think that's terrific. Let's dive right into it. I think one of the ones that we've had some real coverage on today was the privatisation of airports, and in particular Moorabbin Airport, though we know that we can flesh that out more broadly to Canberra and others. Can you provide a response as to what confidence you can give to the councils, to the community, that we're not going to allow private property developers to continue impinging on general aviation and small business space at our airfields?
Senator Janet Quigley. So I guess there's a number of things that we operate in terms of managing and regulating our federally leased airports. So our Airports Act sets out, as you'd be aware, all of the regulatory requirements that we fulfil. The master planning process is the primary vehicle in which we engage with the airports in terms of their development activities. We have a number of touch points that happen through that process in terms of engaging with CASA on safety aspects, in terms of dealing with air services, in terms of the operationalisation of those plans. At the moment, Moorabbin, as you know, is going through a review of their master plan from 2015, and they're out for consultation at the moment. We have worked with them to give them an extension on the consultation timeframe so that we can cover or ensure that there's sufficient time to engage with the stakeholders. And we've also been dealing and talking to some of the stakeholders directly as well. What we've been doing is encouraging them to engage with this process, because when we do get the master plan proposal, which is due in February next year, it will have to outline all of the discussions or the proposals that they've received and what they've done to address those. And so we'll use that as the basis of our analysis when we put a recommendation or provide the plan to the DPM for his final approval. Our covering lease with all of the federal airports require them to maintain the airport as a functioning airport. So that's sort of our first point of clarity in terms of their ability and their focus in terms of operating the airport as an airport. And the master plan process, as we say, outlines all of the arrangements that they need to follow, and that we then use to inform that decision-making process.
So I'm curious because my understanding of what maintaining an airport and what theirs will be, I suspect will be quite different. It's not just the airstrip and the taxiway and the apron. It's all of the small businesses that surround that provide training, that provide maintenance, that, we heard from a doctor earlier today who's operating out of 6 square metres with a public toilet to provide aviation medicals, you know, a critical part of our industry. So how are you going to define what maintaining an airfield or an air operation is?
So because each airport is different and their operational base will be different, it's basically impossible for us to have a single definition. And so we work with each of the airports on an individual basis around their plan and what they're intending to do. And as we say, we take into account the stakeholders that are on as tenants and other interested parties through that consultation process. We have a look at what their issues are, and we make sure that the airports are addressing their concerns through that development process. But outlining or defining how the airport functions as an airport is on a case-by-case basis, depending on what their individual arrangements are.
I appreciate that, but all of these developers who are putting in place retail or supporting retail, big box warehouses, on airfields or very close around them, are driving up the cost for these small businesses to stay in place. And so then they go, oh, they couldn't afford the lease. They've had to, you know, we offered them a lease. I don't mention that it's not an appropriate commercial rate. And the reason why I think this is so important is that we've got an aviation or workforce crisis looming. We know that half the pilots who are left have gone overseas to fill jobs in those markets that have reopened more quickly than Australia have. We've got a very shallow environment when our airlines are training pilots themselves. We don't have the breeding ground of general aviation and charter and smaller operators. We've got almost no maintenance skills. You know, it's driven all the costs up so significantly. And so, you know, I'm appealing to you, if you guys don't have an understanding of how to build that ecosystem, nobody else cares or will do anything about it. You are our only hope.
So I think...
So my question is that definition, I appreciate you're saying every airfield is different, but there are some fundamental bits of what makes aviation work in this nation, and we know that it's failing because aviation is failing. So now I'd ask you what you put in place.
So I think I'd start off by saying that we do appreciate that aviation is an ecosystem and we have to look after the whole ecosystem, and that general aviation is a really important part of that. In terms of engaging with the airports, general aviation is certainly a factor from our perspective in terms of making sure the airport is operating as an airport. So that would be viewed as a critical part of that. And I think the process that we go through internally in terms of analysing what those master plans are looking to achieve does encompass, I think, that whole ecosystem. So I guess I just can reassure you that is a part of our analysis process when we look at these individual airport activities.
One of the questions that Senator Sterle asked the Kingston Council was, you know, is it too late? Is it too late to retrieve this situation? What is your views on that? At what point have we left this discussion too late?
I think I did hear some of the council's presentation where I think they said that they think that at the moment the mix between non-aviation and aviation is probably at its maximum, was their view. And that this new master development plan will be an important part in terms of evaluating the next steps. So I don't think it is too late, and the master plan process is meant to ensure that planning process does meet all the different stakeholder views, then we can balance up all the vested interests. We do know, I think, or appreciate that the non-aeronautical business part of an airport is important for the sustainability of an airport, and we've particularly seen that through COVID, where airports have been able to sustain themselves, and that's in large part because of the diversity of activity that they have on their airport. So I think we do acknowledge it's an important part of that privatisation and their ability to be a sustainable business, but that absolutely has to be balanced up with their intent to operate as an airport and ensure that they've got that diversity of aviation business on their airport land.
Yeah, I mean, that's the sustainability element, I think, quickly gets drowned out by people saying, great, this land, it's now very valuable, it's generally close to the city, we're going to start do some property development. And then before you know it, they've invested a significant amount of money into upgrading roads and fences and developing that private enterprise section. And meanwhile, the very core of the business, the lifeblood of what makes aviation work, has been driven off. And where to? Well, it won't be anywhere that services aviation because, the more distant and regional you get, then, the less people there is that you're servicing, and it's more difficult for training and more difficult for maintenance. And, I think this is a very, very serious issue that as a nation, not just national security, but the fundamentals of what we believe in of aviation, this is a turning point, and we either hold the ground or we may as well just bulldoze every airfield, let them build IKEAs and Bunnings and whatever else all across them and be done with it, and at least not break the hearts of all these little businesses who are just struggling along under, Australian regulation and it's not breeding pilots and maintenance crew. I do feel very passionately that you are the last line of defence on this, and if you don't make a very clear stand on it, then nobody else will. So I appeal to you on that regard. I don't want to labour the point. We've also heard again about this, the pilot shortage, and there was an interesting proposal from one of the flight schools around the introduction of an apprentice type scheme to bring on an apprentice type that you can subsidise the wages of a second pilot in dual engine aircraft, and so that we can quickly tool up the number of people who are being trained in Australia. Is that something that the department would be willing to take on board?
So we've been talking to a large range of stakeholders about their concerns on skills and workforce, and I guess there's been a range of different considerations that have been brought to our attention. Our focus to date has been very much on the COVID response, and I think that's where industry has wanted and needed the government's support. And skills and workforce, as I'm sure you've heard through your hearings, has been an issue since pre-COVID. And so we're going through a process of trying to understand the impacts of COVID, which are still, I guess, unclear in terms of where and how the recovery will unfold. But we are definitely working with the sector to understand where all of their concerns are and building up that sort of understanding and data that we need. A lot of what we've been talking about is anecdotal in a lot of ways, and so getting the data that we need to support that in terms of supporting our analysis and engaging with government on where we think the issues are has been a large part of what we've been doing over the sort of last 6 to 12 months.
Right. So you would know that, the a number of pilots left the industry during COVID, and a number of the remainder have now gone offshore to jobs because the aviation industry is tooling up again much faster over there than it is here. What are we going to be left with?
So I guess in terms of looking at the impacts of the workforce, we have been talking to the sort of bigger end of town as well, just to sort of understand where they're at with their workforce and their standing staff back up. They've certainly indicated to us that their workforce at the moment is stable. and they are getting people. The workforce is quite sticky and always has been around aviation. COVID has added another set of issues to contend with in terms of whether people remain. But until you call those people back in, it's very hard to understand whether that sort of concern around them not coming back can be tested.
And Senator, if I might just add to that, the government's also put in place a number of programs to ensure that there is that capacity for Australia's airlines to respond as the borders open. The International Aviation Support Program is one that I'm particularly thinking of, where Australia's international airlines have been provided with some funding to assist in the retention of that international aviation capacity, including training for flight crew, pilots and others to keep them stuck to the sector. There's a similar domestic program that was quickly administered.
So with the COVID programs, the focus has been about that minimum connectivity, but also making sure that the workforce remains attached to their organisations. And again, when they go to call people back in as the network increases, that was meant to support that sort of recall back into the workplace. And that's yet to be tested, as I say, and we expect as Queensland open their borders and the domestic networks increase, we'll be able to see exactly where those impacts might occur.
So, I mean, once again, we're ending up talking about the big end of town, the big end of the industry. What thoughts have you got in place about re-establishing the general aviation sector, particularly with a look at regulation and cost, and building that ecosystem again?
So Jason Dmowski, Senator, in terms of the importance, so the discussion around the larger airlines does play into that picture around general aviation, because we do know it's that ecosystem of training and working your way up through. So the fact that the pilots and skilled workforce has remained attached to the larger airlines is important for general aviation in terms of those larger airlines not coming in and taking from there, and it's been an important factor there.
But it's not refilling the pool, is it? I think we were calling it overfishing before.
Yeah, so a couple of programs that we've got at the moment that are looking to support an increase in workforce. So we've got our Women in Aviation program, which was established a couple of years ago, and there's a specific set of activities that are around promoting aviation as a career with women as the target group.
Did you know that only 4% of women are pilots? I find that extraordinary. I would have thought it was a terrific career for a woman. You don't have some of the weight restrictions that you might have in other industries. I don't know. I just thought 4% seems alarming, doesn't it?
It is. Which is basically why the program was established, because of those very low numbers. The program's been impacted by COVID because of our ability to for the program to be rolled out, to have that in broader community engagement. But we have another 6 months of that program where we're looking to re-engage and make sure that we can have as broad a reach as possible. The 2018 expert panel that looked at workforce and skills also came up with a number of recommendations, which we've been working through. The rollout of that, or the review of that, has been impacted by COVID. But one of the other things that they recommended was an increase to the loans scheme. And that came into play in 2020, which was where the loans to pilots were increased in line with other professionals like doctors, so that they were getting the same kind of access to that support. So that came in 2020. The discussions that we've been having with general aviation around workforce has been largely around the CASA and the VET programs, where there's some misalignment and some inconsistencies between the programs. And so, again, we're sort of looking into that into more detail and talking to our education colleagues around what we can do in terms of skills and national approaches to some of that work.
All right. I thank you for your evidence, and I'll hand over to Senator Sterle in a second, but I'm a bit concerned. I don't know, I don't get a sense you've been out on the ground at Moorabbin. Perhaps I'm wrong, but having a look at, you know, what's happening to general aviation in that space. And I can tell you that, you know, the helicopter industry, particularly amongst, you know, cattle mustering and those things, there are no engineers available. If you get an apprentice, they've got to go away for, you know, nearly half of the year. You know, the FBT on housing, the Productivity Commission tried to remove the exemption for FBT on company provided housing the other day. That would have just been the last straw. And I just don't know that anybody's really aware of how difficult the general aviation industry is. You know, we are down to the last operator in some regions. And, you know, unfortunately, we don't have time to talk about some of the new technology that's coming out in helicopters in North Queensland and, you know, electric equipment. And, you know, there's some exciting stuff happening. But I'm just worried that the only people who are left in this space are, you know, are going to be, you know, billionaires and big companies that can afford to resource, you know, operations along the coast, and that regionally where aviation began and why it was so important is just died.
I guess I just want to reassure you that we are taking the general aviation concerns very seriously, and we've got my team engaged with all of the federally leased airports on a very regular basis, and they have been to Moorabbin, I think, within the last 6 months. And I think we're looking to go and there's another visit scheduled, I think, in the not too distant future. So we are engaging, we are talking, we're building the evidence. As we move out of that real big focus on COVID and the support, that's really pivoting us into the recovery and what we need to do in that space to support the sector get back on their feet again.
Okay. Senator Sterle?
I do, thank you, Chair. Ms Rawlings, forgive my cynicism, but when you talked about the airports, the having to have non-aeronautical businesses because they need to be sustainable, when I talk about sustainable, I talk about small businesses being able to cover their fixed costs, their wages, their variable costs, and God help us even have a little bit of profit so they can invest back into their businesses. What does sustainability mean to the department when you look at these multi-corporations that are running airports?
So in terms, I think, as you know, the airports were privatised back in '98, and so we've got arrangements now for them to be able to operate their business for them in terms of a viable business. So they will be looking at it in terms of, you know, how they make themselves sustainable. We are looking at that, plus how the sector continues to function and that they do maintain that ability to operate as an airport. So we balance both of those kind of needs, I guess, in terms of them being able to operate as a private entity and a successful commercial entity, as well as the need for them to operate as an airport and service their tenants.
Good. So do they sit down with you, open books, and you can see their actual costs, so they can't pull the wool over your eyes and say, we can't keep small aviation businesses on this airport, we better go to a major retail chain because we can get more money out of them, as said to the McDonald's said. So they actually straight out fair dinkum open with you, or you just take their word that they need to charge 17 times more than what they get out of that little maintenance shed in the corner if they had a what I call it, a Costco or another one of those other things there. So what you do?
So how they set up their tenants is a commercial decision for them.
So in other words, you've got, sorry, Ms Rawlings, I'm not being rude, I'm just trying to get down. So in other words, you've got no idea? You being the department?
Not in relation to the individual arrangements that they would have with the tenants on their land. We don't engage or have any role in that particular part of it.
Sure. So what I'm trying to establish, Ms. Rawlings, and well, how can you look at the Senate committee in the eye and say that you've got to make sure that they're sustainable? So to go to the problems that Senator McDonald raised with you, when you've got no idea what their costings are, how do you do that?
So I guess what we're doing here is, when we look at the master development plan, we'll get all of the proposals that have gone into the airport in terms of where the concerns are. We expect that the airport will respond to those in an appropriate way. So if the commercial costs around a tenancy is a major issue, we would expect that that would come out through the master development planning process. And if we had, I think, any particular concerns, and I'm just looking at my colleague in terms of how we engage on a daily basis, we would revert back to the airport and ask for clarification or confirmation of what they've done to address these issues if we think they're problematic. So we have an opportunity to go back and delve into the process around the master planning activities, as I've just described.
Forgive my glazed, confused look, but if the council, say Moorabbin, Kingston Council, come to you, and do they have the ability to come to you and say, well, hang on, crikey, these are corporations, these are money-making machines. I don't care what anyone says, this is my opinion. They're not in it because they're fantastic social captains and they love everyone in our states. These are money-making adventures and how much profit. I don't mind to make profit, that's good, but how much profit is profit, or how much is enough? So you really have no clue, no idea. And I'm not being rude to you, Ms. Rawlings. You're relying on the good faith of the corporations to say, oh no, we have to be sustainable. We have to have this business park with an airstrip in it, because if we had more green land and we had all these little training places and maintenance places and services for general aviation, we couldn't possibly afford to run this airport.
So just in terms of the council question, yes, they can certainly come to us and talk to us about their concerns. And in fact, we've got a meeting scheduled with them, I think, in the last week of December. And that's a part of the department's role, is to talk to all of the various stakeholders. And if they've got concerns that they want to raise with us, we will take that on board in terms of our understanding and assessment of the airport's activities. But it's in the airport's best interest to have positive relationships with their tenants, like it would be any commercial entity. So,
Ms. Rawlings, sorry, Ms. Rawlings, yeah, okay. It is also in the best interest for the corporations to get the best return for their shareholders, and they could have fantastic relations with Costco or with Bunnings or with the Donut King, whoever they've got there. Let's not fool ourselves. They're going to have they'd have a fantastic relationship with me if I wanted their land too, and I was able to knock over the little guy. So, but you really don't know, do you? You don't, and if you do, please tell me. You have no idea of what their costings are, what their profits are. You just take it from them. Is that right?
that's
They're
right.
not going to show you their books, are they?
Yeah, well, no, we don't check their books. No, we
That's right, of course. So I'm trying to say, Ms. Rawlings, I'm maybe it's getting close to Christmas and it's been a long year for some people, but maybe I just can't cop the sustainability argument coming from the department to a couple of senators who've been around a fair while in this area and thinking that the truth of the matter is it's not a sustainability, it's whatever they tell you, you'll swallow.
Well, Senator, they're private entities. They operate as a commercial business. So that's
exactly, Ms. Rawlings. That's why you don't have to practice with the fancy words and all that. Of course they are. They're in it because they don't love the society. They're in it because they want to make a heck of a lot of money, and you guys have got no idea. So please don't practice on us with it's all about sustainability. Okay. Sorry, Ms. Rawlings, don't take it personally. I think I've outdone my. I'm not going to get my Christmas card from the department, so I'll just.
Well, I think these are important issues, and if the Department of Infrastructure and Aviation doesn't hold airport owners to account over providing the facilities and the space for aviation, then nobody else will. And so you do have a big responsibility, because I think if we look back in time to come, we don't want to look back and say, oh yeah, 2021, we had an opportunity to draw a line in the sand and we didn't. And the result is that we have less connectivity, less appropriate space for general aviation, less space for flying, training, less space for maintenance. And we just sold off airport after airport to property developers. I mean, at least when we sold off Telstra, we put in place a community service obligation. I think that we missed an opportunity to do the same when we sold off airfields.
And so the Airports Act does provide us with the ability to make sure, as we've discussed this afternoon, that requirement that they have to continue to function as an airport. So it is there, I think, and the department takes seriously its responsibilities in terms of making sure that that happens.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, that is terrific. I think we've had a great discussion about this because, you know, my concern has been that CASA and the department has been very focused on Qantas and Virgin and the big operators, which is terrific. They're great organisations, but at the end of the day, what feeds general aviation, particularly regional, is general aviation. And operating as an airport, I'm just very nervous that we'll end up with a lot of places for vertical takeoff electric vehicles, but we're not going to have spaces to have that genuine rich ecosystem of small businesses that have always had a place on these airports, and that we know we're having intrusion onto airfield, onto airspaces. We're having intrusion into in pushing up the prices for general aviation operators. And I sat on one of the consultations for the developer at Moorabbin Airport, and I hope they didn't call it a consultation. It was you know, the people who were there were told what the developer was doing, and there wasn't a lot of spot for engagement and feedback. You know, it was. And then it became very adversarial, which was unfortunate. So, all right. I think that's all the questions, all the time that we have to ask questions of you this afternoon. Of course, we have estimates coming up in only a little while, so we'll look forward to catching up with you again then. So thank you for your time preparing, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senators.
Thank you. Right.